Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a ninth submission by Tytti of her horse Usko. They're in Sweden and just coming out the end of a long, cold winter. The last video we saw them, there was still ice and snow on the ground, but we can see it's cleared up a bit there. And he's just getting him back to work at the end of his winter. So here in the lunge line, without anything, this is really great. I love to see how, even without the shambo now, he's starting to stretch really nicely over his back and working quite well. So perfect example of how once they learn to stretch, we don't even need anything to keep them there anymore because it's the most comfortable position for them, and they will seek it out once they learn it. Just like most young horses, if we start them lunging correctly, they'll usually be stretching within 5 or 10 minutes, and if we let them do that, they will continue to do that for the rest of their lives. But unfortunately, too many people stop that from happening by putting too short of side reins and things like this on their horses. But this looks really good. I couldn't be more pleased with the way this horse is coming back, after a long winter. And he's a little bit fat, sure, but not bad. And as I always say is, when you let horses off, they come back pretty much where you left off. They might be a little fatter and have lost a bit of condition, that sort of thing, but their mental attitude comes right back when they've been trained correctly, and as we see here, this is the perfect example. So this is really good, and lunging like this, he certainly looks like you could do away with the shambone and just lunge him like this. That's a perfect frame for him right there. Now we can see without the saddle on that his back is still a little bit dropped. He hasn't developed much thrust, that he's not pushing off the ground a whole lot yet with the back end, but he's certainly swinging more actively and consistently and deeper. You were talking in your tape how he seems to have slowed down to you. Well, that's what they should. They slow down, but if you look at the tape, oh, it looks like he's moving. So we want horses to work slow and deep, and that's what this horse is starting to do. So you don't have that impression that he's running so much all the time. Same thing with the canter, and as you've discovered, the canter just takes some time, and especially with this kind of horse, and you haven't done much of that, and we can see it's still a little disconnected. So once again, trot, trot, trot is the way, and just try the canter occasionally. And when he's strong enough, you'll find that the canter will just be there without any difficulty. But I really like what I'm seeing here in the walk, as well as the trot work here on the lunge without anything on him. He's stretching beautifully and coming over his back to the degree that he can at this level. And of course, he has gained a few extra pounds, and that tends to pull them down a little bit. But he's certainly coming back really nicely. And this, once again, proves how comfortable they are in this position. Once they learn it, they don't need to keep anything on them to hold them there because it feels right to them. So really good job here. And this is a good way to start your work in hand. Obviously, you're not really asking him to do anything here, but you're just walking alongside him. And as you can see there, it would be difficult for someone as short as you are there relative to the height of this horse to be able to work him very well in hand, because you do need a little more it's difficult when you're down below the withers to try to get a horse to work in hand. But what you're doing there is just fine as a way to start. I wouldn't call it a really working in hand yet, but a good way to start. It's just really what you're doing is walking alongside there. So as you get on, keep studying my videos on the work in hand and try to get him to start doing a leg yield as soon as you can. But there's nothing wrong with this. What I would suggest, though, there, if you're going to just try to keep the slack out of the rein. So just like when you ride, you keep a little more feel of the contact. Now this is your husband trying it, and then once again, he is a little taller and he looks a little more right size to work this horse in hand, and he's taking a little more contact. Now what we just need to do is just get him to step away. Remember, that's the whole point of this work in hand, is to get him to work into the outside rein. So it doesn't look to me like he's carrying a whip, which of course was the necessary ingredient in order to begin to do lateral work in hand, because the whip is your leg, obviously touching him on the side, otherwise you've just got your reins. So this is not bad, but I would like to see you go ahead to the next step, which would be to begin to ask for a little more lateral work. And that's kind of what I think you're trying to do here, but without a whip in your hand, you really can't ask him to step over. So it's more he's just kind of moving away from your body. So the next step would be to get a dressage whip and carry it, and and be you're a little bit close up tight to the horse. We want to stay back off of them just a little bit, and so that we have room there in order to use the whip. So next time you try that, go ahead and put the whip in your hand and begin to work for a little more lateral work. So again, lunging here now with the tack on. Looks really good. Love how he's stretching into the contact here. And yes, you know, he's going slower, but he's certainly tracking better, tracking deeper, and that's what we want. We want to cover the most ground with the slowest possible footfalls. There, that's absolutely beautiful. And we were talking about the size of the circle. Obviously, it does make a difference. If we get the circle too small, it's just going to be difficult for the horse to be able to handle that. So, but the size you're on now seems to be pretty good. I don't have a problem with this. And once again, your rhythm is really good. You know, his stretch he stretches completely sometimes and not so much sometimes, but that's okay. You're keeping a good rhythm, but he's getting back into the position. Just like everything else, nothing is perfect. That's beautiful like that. That's absolutely lovely. And once again, how much slower and deeper his footfalls are. And he looks really sound these days. So compared to when I first started seeing your videos, the horse looks much improved. And you can actually see there when he really gets his head down, there's almost a little lift off the ground. That's what we're looking for, the horse to push a little more actively off the ground, developing a little more thrust, as we say. It's like a rocket ship. It's that thrust that pushes you up into the air. So very good work here on the lunge. Once again, no shambo, no side reins, and he's stretching absolutely beautifully. So now right here, it does look just a little bit slow. It's not quite as swinging as it was a minute ago, but then you got after him right there and you get a little more out of him. Now this canter looks a little bit better than the canter I saw the other way. Once again, I'd keep it to a minimum of that. But if it activates him a little more like it did there, that's good. Now we have a better trot. That's looking more like a little closer to optimal for him, about that speed. Getting a little slow again there. And you can see how as he slows down, the head comes up. You can clearly see how the hindquarters just sort of fall out behind. And that's what we're looking for all the time. That is, looking whether that's happening or not. So good work on the lunge line. That all looks like it's coming along really, really well. Love the fact that you don't have to have the shambone or side reins on him anymore, and he's going right into the stretch. Absolutely beautiful. So you're certainly on the right track there. You know, and yes, he looks a little bit overweight there coming back after the winter, but not terribly. Not a bad stretch in the walk there. He could be a little more active. Good, and that was a nice transition. You know, and I like how you didn't bother him. You just moved him forward, and look how the transition stayed nice. His head and neck stayed in a nice position. Back stayed correct. That's a little bit slow here. I'd like a little more swing in that trot, like you had in the lunge line. It's just a tiny bit slower than we'd like to see. Now you can see how in that downwards transition that pretty much you just kind of hollowed and braced against your hand there. So I wouldn't do too much of this yet. You know, remember, just like in your first transition, that was really nice. And the downwards with a horse like this are bound to be a little more difficult. But as I said, once again, if we just don't work too hard at the transitions and just get the horse really consistent in the walk and then get him really consistent in the trot, then pretty much those transitional problems just disappear all by themselves. But if we worry about having great transitions before the horse is even consistent overly over its back in the two gaits that you're transitioning from, one from into the other, it's not going to be very good. And if we worry about it, we'll just frustrate the horse. And I see that all the time with riders trying to make perfect transitions on horses that aren't even consistent in the gaits themselves. So I guarantee you the transition is going to be harder. But pretty nice there, moving up into it, and that's not what you want to do. You never want to try to hold the horse's head down. That's always the biggest mistake people are making. You can't force a horse into a good frame or into good contact. The way you're going about it is quite nice. Now this is a little too slow again here, so here we need to send him on a little bit more actively. Once again, study the trot that you have in the lunge line when he's really stretching. When we can get that in the trot work mounted, then you're going to be golden, as they say. Same thing here with this walk. It's just a little bit too slow. We'd like to get that a little more active and swinging. But as he's starting to stretch, it certainly starts to look a little better. You know, something that you might want to try is to have your husband lunge you on the horse while you ride, and just on a nice big 20-meter circle if you're having really trouble keeping him consistent. And I mean simply lunging, just hooking the line to the inside ring of the bit, and just so he's back behind you there with the whip, so you can encourage a little more active and swingingness in that walk and in the trot as well, and get it consistent. And then that will transfer when you get him really so he can do that well with the help of somebody with the whip there. That usually will transfer over when you start riding without it. Good transition here. I like how he went right up into that without any problem. He didn't try to hold him down, but he moved right into it. And this is a little more active trot than you had before. It still needs to be just a little more active. It's just 10% more active than what you're doing here. But you're certainly right. If you feel, you said as you go faster, you feel him begin to lose it, and that's very typical. You know, if a horse like this, he has a lot of mass, and so when that mass starts to move, inertia is that desire for that mass to keep moving forward. Just like a train, how hard it is to stop them. So the heavier a horse is, the more difficult it is. Now that's starting to look really good there. Now that's a better trot. You've picked it up a little bit, and by virtue of that, you're sending him through to your hand a little more. A little bit of lateral work right there. It looks like you're doing quite nicely, holding the bend pretty nicely. That's good. Now I like this trot. Once again, it could be, you see how you start to turn the corner there and it slows down a little bit too much, and also why we want to keep all our turns and circles, to at least 20 meters on a horse like this until they get really consistent over their backs, and then we can try to make them smaller. Because remember, every time we lose the rhythm, we lose the gymnastic quality of the gait. And you can see there once again in that downward transition how he just sort of slammed on the brakes on his front end. But you did the right thing to just send him on forward again. And once again, don't expect those to be too great until he's really consistent in the trot and the walk, and then you'll start to see all those transitions working a little better. There you go, pretty good walk here. Once again, it could be just 10% more active, but it's not bad, and the moments that you're getting to stretch are good. Any horse would be better off even if you never touched the reins. I mean, kind of like, in the hunt field, they used to have, that's how the standing martingales, not that I approve of them, I do not at all, but I would rather have a person who really can't ride just leave a horse alone and leave it to its own defenses than to try to put a horse in a frame. There's nothing worse for a horse than, people who really don't understand how horses work trying to put them in frames, because it always ends up, the horse gets the worst of it, let's put it that way. So even if you just send them briskly forward and not even have any contact at all, as I said, the way the old hunter riders used to ride in the hunt field, that's, the ones that weren't such good riders, that's where that came from, just have a standing martingale and, just don't touch the reins, just use it as a start and stop, and don't try to hold them in a frame, because boy, you get in a bunch of horses and try holding against the mouth of the horse and the horses start going crazy. Better transition in the trot that time. Obviously, his upwards transitions are a little better at this point than his downwards transitions are. And that would be typical of this kind of a heavier type of horse. They tend to want to stop up short. But once again, now this trot's starting to look a little better. And once again, he is certainly tracking much slower and deeper than he used to do. That's really looking pretty good right there. Good, and I like how you make a nice wide turn there, exactly what. Once again, it gets a little too slow here. I'd like to send him on just a little bit more. But once again, it's a fine line, and you have to feel that balance. If you go a little faster and you find he totally hollows and gets out of balance on you, then just slow it down a little bit. In time, you'll be able to go a little faster and get a little bigger swing in the trot. Though this is starting to look pretty good here, and that's more like where I'd line him right there. You have moments where he's just about at the right spot. You see how he comes around that corner and kind of brings his head up and starts pulling with his shoulders again. So once again, reason not to do too many small turns. And I know you were working here in the ring with another horse, so you have to do what you have to do. There you go. Now that's better. You see him come right through there? You suddenly got enough swing, and that was more like it. So you're certainly on the right track here. He's having moments when he's getting really good for you. Here you can see he's a little ewe-necked and just not quite swinging through to the degree that we'd like. You know, once again, when we see the muscle on the bottom of the neck tense, that tells us the horse is pulling with the shoulders. So as we see the bottom of the neck soften up and the horse stretches forward, we see what that does to the stride, and that brings it longer and more active and swinging, like he's starting to do there. Good, and you can see how he struggles to make that sharp of a turn right there. So a horse like this, we're pretty much going to want to keep on big circles and wide turns. You know, think of the corner of your arena as a quarter of the smallest circle that you can make. I see people all the time. This is a good trot. Oh, he just stumbled there a little bit. Looks like your arena footing is not a little bank there on the wall that he hit, which is something we do have to worry about all the time. You know, when we're riding in riding arenas, if the rail is got a 1 foot, hole in the rail because so many horses have gone in it, you can't do lateral work of the horse on two different levels. You can't have the back feet, a foot lower than the front feet. It's not going to work. Just like when he came around that corner, he kind of hit that the banked footing there against the rail and kind of made him trip a little bit. So getting that levelness is what we want to look for. And so once again, we see how that downwards transition. I want you to really try to take more time in those transitions and just as long as it takes, even if it takes you like 3 times around the ring to slow him down enough to come to a walk. Try not that to be so abrupt because he just throws on the brakes there. So try to keep rising a little longer and really make those transitions when you're on a straight line and let it slow down very gradually so he gets out of the habit of just slamming on the brakes like that. Same thing there. You can see how when you tried to make that 90-degree turn there, that was very difficult for him. So just a little bigger turns on everything you're doing there so we don't lose the rhythm. Remember, every time we lose the rhythm, we lose the gymnastic quality of the exercise, which means essentially that, yes, we did it, but it didn't do the horse any good, and it will have shortened, not shortened, but shortened his stride a little bit, which is what we want not to happen. We want to get in that optimal position and keep it there as long as we can relative to the session. That is, I'm not talking about hours, I'm talking about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Not bad, a little bit of lateral work right there, stepping over into it a little more. But for starting out. Now sitting to the trot, I just would not do that at all with this horse. His back is not strong enough for you to sit to, so just stick to the rising trot for the time being. And you could see how just that little bit of sitting trot just kind of made him very, very earthbound. So until you see that hole filling up behind the saddle there that you see on him where his back is a little bit dropped, we're not going to want to do too much sitting trot, if any. That's one of the other big mistakes that people make in dressage is thinking that if you're not sitting to the trot, that somehow you're not doing dressage. Well, you want to keep the sitting trot to a minimal, especially at this stage. And once again, you never want to sit on a hollow horse. It's only going to make him worse. You'll never get a horse round by sitting on a hollow horse. We just give him room for his back to come up. It's a little better trot here, and not a bad bend there. He's starting to bend a little bit on the circle. Oh, now that was a good downwards transition. Now that's the first downwards transition that we've seen that he didn't just slam on the brakes. And certainly, when you're doing these transitions, don't try to go right to the halt. He should always be going to a walk and then a halt if you're going to halt. He's not ready to do transitions leaving a gate out, in other words, from walk to canter or whatever the case may be. Though he almost did it there for you. Something obviously spooked him there a little bit. And once again, you see that kind of turn that kind of threw him around. He lost his back and he got hollow. So be really careful and very particular about making every time you change the direction or bend, or nice big wide turn that gives the horse plenty of room to do it, Same thing there. You can see how they just kind of plotted around on his front end. Now, I know you're having to work with that horse in the ring, which is maybe why you're doing that. But even then, I would take him in a wider turn, go to a different part of the ring or something, so you don't have to pull him around on his front end the way that turn was. Same thing here. Way too sharp a turn for this horse to make. And all he's doing is hollowing back. You see, as soon as you start into it, he lifts his head up. So that's going to be work that's really not useful for him. Anything that makes the horse lose his back is counterproductive to what you're trying to do, especially at this point, or at any point, really. So wider turns, I see people all the time that can barely, the horses aren't even over their backs, and they're worried about doing turns on the forehands and things like this, which will really hollow the horse's back. So it takes a lot of patience and a lot of just, thinking about what you're doing, that we don't just throw the horse around in little turns and that sort of thing, that we always plan to make a big wide turn. And once again, you can see how he started off here kind of pulling with his shoulders, but once you get him going, he starts to swing a little better. We never quite get the stretch as good as we have it on the lunge line, which is also why I was going to suggest that maybe you have your husband lunge you on the horse. Get him really stretching on the lunge line, and then get on there on the lunge line and see if that will help, translate into doing it under saddle. A little better there as he comes around, though his neck is getting a little short here, so he's starting to look not so good in this last little bit here as he was before. Now I don't know if he's just getting tired. Not a bad little bit of lateral work there again. So I'd still like to see him right away. As soon as you try that lateral work back in a swinging walk and getting back out there again. Every time in the beginning, especially that we do lateral work, it tends to shorten the horse up a little bit. And once again, just watch that sitting trot. We really don't want to do any sitting trot on this horse yet. That's a better trot. Now it's starting to look better, though he needs to get the neck longer out in front of you. A little better downwards transition. At least he didn't just jam on the brakes, and that's what we want to avoid. Just once again, now this is a little slow here. At this point, we need to just send him on a little bit. Better there as he starts to stretch. And once again, watch how all these little differences, watch what difference it makes to the horse's frame. As I'm saying, when you're doing those little sharp turns and things like that, watch what it does to him. If it hollows him, it's not very useful. Better trot here, though I'd still like to see him stretching out a lot more. A little better here. Still needs to be just a tiny bit more active. So I would say 10%. Once again, you see how he tried to make that turn that was too sharp a turn for him, so he had to slow down. He kind of pulled himself around that turn with his shoulders. So really try to make big, wide turns that you can keep your balance on this horse, that he can keep his balance, that is, and we can stay in the same rhythm. Better trot here. Now this is starting to look better. Now it's starting to look a little more like it. Especially now that he is carrying a little extra weight after the winter, but his belly is starting to pull up here a little bit. It's starting to look better. Remember, we look for that line. We look for the horse to engage its core, and we're starting to see a little bit of a line there along the rib cage. But as you said, he is carrying quite a bit of extra weight here, and that's often the trouble with this type of horse. They seem to gain weight even when you feed them air, so to speak. Better trot here. There you go. Now it's starting to get into a little bit. He's bending off your inside leg there. Now that was a better turn. Now see, that turn was nice and wide, and that time you were able to keep the rhythm. So that's what I'm talking about. You don't want to make any turn that's the angle is any more closed than that. Better trot here. Yes, and I said, he actually looked a little tired to me even before this, is what I was thinking. He was starting to get a little tired. So that's a good place. Get one last little good bit and then stop, always. As soon as you feel your horse starting to get tired, you want to do just a little bit more. So you have to push them on a little more than what they want to do, but not so much that it becomes a fight or something like that. Just what you're doing here. Just send them back out again on something that's simple. Always end with something simple that they can do well. And then they will remember that the next time they come back. You'll start off there with that mental attitude. Once again, it's much too fast to stop there. So you should have gone on around the ring and really taken your time. But once again, that he just jammed on the brakes. So great job with him. You're doing a great job bringing him back after the winter. I know it was a long, cold winter over there, but he looks really good coming back to a good place. And, you know, the main thing I really love is how much you guys love this horse and take care of him. And here he is giving a scratch and obviously really enjoying that, the end of that rake. Though I would be careful about doing that with the rake, but big curry might be a better way to go. But he seems to be enjoying that as long as, you know, he's not sticking him too much, but he seems to be enjoying the process. So great work. Keep it up. I look forward now that the spring is here. You should be able to get him into a lot better shape. And just keep up the good work that you're doing. Watch those small circles, that being the biggest thing. And I'd advise maybe trying the lunging thing as we talked about. You know, lunge him first, you have to tack on, get him really stretching, and then get on and let your husband lunge you and see if you can get that same stretch in the trot that you got on the lunge line, because that's a little more where we quite get him. He's not quite releasing quite as far as we'd like him to do under saddle yet. So keep trying that. But considering that you didn't have you've taken off the sham bone and all of that, that was really, really good. And he's showing much, much improvement. So once again, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Look forward to seeing you the next time. Great work.